Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Business Law 1. Today we're going to be looking at Chapter 21, which involves bailments and the storage, shipment, and leasing of goods. So some of the overall learning objectives that I hope for us to kind of take away after examining this chapter. Understand what the elements of a bailment are. Understanding the bailee's liability as well as the bailor. Those are the two parties that have engaged in a contract over a bailment. We'll look at other rights and duties in terms of compensation and casualty to goods that can arise when bailment transfers occur, as well as some special types of bailments regarding innkeepers and then warehousing. So that's going to be the focus for this chapter. Excuse me, please. So when we talk about a bailment is an agreement between the owner of some personal property, and that owner is going to be allowing someone else to have access and use of that personal property as per the agreement. So, for some period of time. At the end of that contractual period, those identical goods are going to be returned to the owner of that property. So the bailor, just to kind of go through some terms of art here, the bailor is the one who owns the property and is granting permission to someone to use it. That person using it temporarily is the bailee. Always remember that the bailee has possession but not title. We'll go through some types of bailments because there's different situations based on like how we classify bailment transactions. But, probably the easiest bailment for most students to kind of understand, because most of us have been in this situation, is when you rent a car. So you go to one of the car rental companies and, you're basically leasing a vehicle. It could be for a day, it could be a weekend, whatever the term is. So the car rental company owns the vehicle. And they're giving you the keys, they're giving you the vehicle, so you have the possession rights for whatever the term is of that contract. And then by the end of that term, you return the same vehicle, not a different one. That is a classic bailment transaction. So just kind of get, that was probably one of the singular best examples to kind of wrap your mind around, well, what is a bailment type transaction? Bailments can be classified in terms of who is the benefiting party. So there's three ways in which you can kind of approach this, different angles of the bailment contract. The contract could be to the sole benefit of the bailor, which is the owner of the property. It could be to the sole benefit of the bailee, the person who's using the property. Or it could be what's referred to as a mutual benefit bailment, where both parties are getting some sort of benefit out of it. That third example, the last one that I just gave, that would be the car rental transaction, because you have to pay a certain amount of money per day for the car to have access to use it, and then at the end of that period you return it. So you're getting benefit out of it because you have the use of a vehicle. The car rental company is getting benefit out of it because they're being able to charge for the use of the car that they own. The other two situations, and I'll kind of go through an example for each of these, and it's important to kind of understand why we're kind of classifying the bailment, in terms of these three types of categories, because depending on the type of bailment, that's going to elicit the level of duty of care, and so I'll talk about that in the next slide. But when we talk about the sole benefit of the bailor, so the owner of the property, so probably a great example is, I have a neighbor, and, when they go on vacation, or if I go on vacation, we usually give the keys to our residence to the other person, and we just say, will you kind of keep an eye out on our property? Usually for me, every summer, I travel out west for a few weeks. I go to a conference and I do different things. And so, I really don't like the idea of my house just sitting empty for a few weeks without people checking in on it. So my neighbor will come in. I've given them a key, so they have access to all of my personal possessions as well as the house in general. And they're doing it as a favor. I'm not paying them, and so they're giving me peace of mind. They're bringing in my mail or whatever, and they're just checking on the general state of things, making sure my house is okay. And then when they go on vacation, I do the same thing. I get nothing out of it. I'm just trying to be a good neighbor. Okay, so that would be the first example where the sole benefit is to the bailor. So when someone watches my house and I'm not paying them, they're doing me a favor. I'm the one that's getting really all the benefit. The other situation, the number two on this list, where the sole benefit is the bailee. Let's say that I have a friend who needs a car. Maybe they're in between vehicles right now. And so I say, I have a spare vehicle. Why don't you just, here are the keys, just use the car for a few weeks until you get your own set of wheels and then bring my car back. I'm not charging them. I'm not getting anything out of it. I'm just trying to be a good friend. And so the person who's using my personal property, the car, the bailee, they're getting all the benefit out of it because they're getting free use of a car for a few weeks. So you hopefully you kind of get the three types of transactions or classifications now. The reason why it's important to understand those classifications is you have to kind of understand, well, what is the standard of care required by the bailee in each of these unique situations. So in that first category where the sole benefit is to the bailor, so that the person who comes and just checks on my house, I'm getting all the benefit out of it. The neighbor, they're only required to exercise only slight care, and they're only liable for gross negligence. So let's say my neighbor comes over, they check on the property, and maybe they forget to lock the front door, and they go home, and someone happens to be walking by. They decide to see if they could kind of enter the property, and the door's unlocked, so they just walk in and they steal everything. Well, the standard of care for the neighbor who is the bailee is only slight care. And is it gross negligence to close a door but not lock it? I don't think that would really be gross negligence. So when I come home, or if my neighbor discovers it the next day, whoever discovers it first, my neighbor is not going to be responsible for that because, I was the one getting all the benefit out of this. The second category where the sole benefit is of the bailee, so that friend that I lent my car to, that person, the bailee, is liable for the slightest of negligence. So I mean, if there's a chip in the paint, if there's a minor ding in the side of the car, whatever it is, the slightest of negligence, they are technically responsible to kind of fix whatever the damage might be. So that's it's a very high level of expectation of duty of care when the sole benefit is to the bailee. The mutual benefit, and this is this is their traditional commercial transaction, like the car rental situation. The bailee is only liable for ordinary negligence, and so anything that kind of comes under that category, failure to exercise reasonable care in a given situation, that's what they're going to be responsible for. So overall with bailments, just kind of understand it's like, okay, there's these three categories. Sole benefit is to the bailor, benefit is to the bailee, or maybe if it's a mutual beneficial bailment. And then the level of care that's expected for each of those. In terms of duties and rights of the bailee, so the person who's using the property, they have to perform as per their part of the agreement. They have to exercise reasonable care, especially in that mutual benefit bailment type of transaction. And they have to return the identical property. That usually is the big things, and that makes sense. You don't want to, if you're one of the car rental companies, you don't want a different vehicle returned. You want the exact same one that you leased to the bailee. Bailor can sue the bailee if the goods are not redelivered according to the agreement. So, again, whatever those terms are, there could be late penalties imposed, and it could escalate from there, depending on the situation. But, obviously, the contract is going to dictate the parameters of that relationship. When we talk about warehousers, so this is another type of situation where it's a bailment-like transaction. When we talk about warehousers, we're not talking about the you store places that you or I might deposit our own personal possessions, for what temporary period of time, whatever. A warehouser in this context is a commercial warehouser, and so they're receiving deposits of inventory or goods from other business entities. And so sometimes businesses, they might have a surplus of inventory and they need a place to temporarily store it. So maybe they'll offsite it in a warehouse environment. And, for whatever the agreement is, the warehouser will store the goods, as per whatever the terms are, climate controlled, special, requirements for delicate or, fragile type goods, whatever the situation is. And the warehouser then will usually inventory everything. So there's a count of, okay, these are the types of goods that have been deposited here. And then they'll issue what is called a warehouse receipt. That receipt is a document of title. And so whoever shows up, if it's a negotiable warehouse receipt, usually that receipt is just that's evidence of, okay, you've got your receipt, so you can claim those goods. So it's important if it's a negotiable warehouse receipt that you do not let that get into the hands of anybody else, because that's proof of ownership. If it's a non-negotiable warehouse receipt, then usually it's made out to a specific party. And so that could be a person within that company that deposited those goods with the warehouser. And so only that person can show up to claim those goods. But just know the warehouse receipt is a document of title for the goods that have been stored there. Usually those receipts, they're very detailed because they'll specify the location, they'll have a date of issuance, it usually has consecutive numbers, it has information regarding the negotiability, it could either be negotiable or non-negotiable. It'll have the storage rate info, description of the goods and the inventory that's stored there, as well as a general liability statement. So they're fairly detailed in the information they provide. To contrast this with the used storage places, normally, when you get a storage locker somewhere, the person who's leasing you that storage locker, they really don't care what you put in there as long as it's not hazardous or dangerous or some type of criminal, activity. But, if you're putting, boxes of clothing or furniture in there for, a few months until you transition from one residence to another, it's whatever, they don't inventory that. So, this is only in a commercial context that we're talking about warehousers. Again, and also remember, with the warehouse receipt, if it's non-negotiable, it's going to list a specified person, and only that person with that non-negotiable receipt can show up to claim those goods that have been stored there. If it's a negotiable warehouse receipt, it might be either left blank, or it could say like to the bearer, so whoever has possession of that warehouse receipt. So, if it's a negotiable warehouse receipt, you just have to be very careful, store it someplace that's secured, because if it just, if it disappears, someone gets a hold of it and has some nefarious purpose, they could show up and say, I'm here to claim, the goods that I have in storage here. And if it's negotiable, then it's like, okay, well, pick up your stuff. And then those goods are going to be gone then. When we talk about limitations of liability on warehousers, since it's a business-to-business transaction, the law will provide for some kind of like room to negotiate. So the warehouser might say, look, I'll cut you a break on the price if, you will basically, kind of concede that, I'm not going to be responsible for certain types of damage that might occur. So normally that's fine, because it's a business-to-business thing. We're not worried about consumer protection when it concerns a business enterprise. Obviously, you're not going to do this with consumer type, storage agreements. We're going to just say whatever happens, it's not our fault. That's obviously not going to be permitted because of consumer protection interests. But the key thing with this limitation on the liability of the warehouser, the depositor of the goods, so the bailor, that person can insist, no, I want to have the full range of protections and warranties available by you as a warehouser. And so obviously the rate will probably increase to whatever the standard amount is. And that's fine. That can be an expectation that the depositor could have there. But again, think of warehousers as a bailment arrangement, because they have possession of goods. They don't have title to goods. And they're going to store those goods for whatever the term of that relationship is. So it would be a mutual benefit bailment, because the warehouser is going to be charging. They're not going to do it for free. And then the bailor, or the owner of the property, they're getting benefit out of a secure location to store their excess goods or inventory. When we talk about different types of carriers, these are companies or different ways in which we transport physical things, whether it's across the street, across the city, state, nation, or planet. And so there's usually three general categories of carriers. There are general common carriers, and these are companies for a price they offer services to the general public. They could be companies, they could be you and I as private individuals, it doesn't matter. And so think of like UPS or FedEx or Airborne Freight, these companies that, post office, so for whatever you want to ship, they'll ship it as per, whatever the fee is that they charge. Contract carriers, they usually are industry specific, and so they have usually specialized vehicles that transport certain types of goods. And so I don't really characterize them as being like open to the general public, but they are open to the general industry in which they're designed to service. So, think of, we've all traveled, along, roads or highways or interstates, and, you've seen different types of trucks. There's your standard type of like semi truck that has like a container, on the back. There are flatbed trucks, that haul like maybe sometimes lumber, or, other types of like, very durable goods because it's all exposed. You have cylindrical type, trailer containers that will transport types of liquids. So it could be fuel, it could be milk, it could be oxygen, nitrogen, whatever, gaseous or in liquid form. And so, usually, those types of contract carriers, they're going to be carrying specific types of goods because the vehicles they operate with, are designed to handle certain types of goods, essentially. Then the third category is private carriers, and some companies, especially larger corporations, on some level internalize their shipping costs. So, if you're Walmart, if you're Amazon, if you're Publix, Walgreens, CVS, Target, all these different companies, usually these companies have major distribution centers, based on different regions across the country or the planet. And so, whoever they're ordering, like, from manufacturers' goods, usually those manufacturers will get the goods to those distribution centers, but then from distribution centers, to actual retail locations, a lot of these companies have their own private fleet of vehicles. And so, they will then, deliver, within, with their own vehicles to these retail locations. So they internalize at least that portion of the shipping costs. And it makes it more efficient. Manufacturers really don't want to deliver to individual stores. They'd rather deliver to major distribution centers and then let those distribution centers with their private carrier fleet deliver to individual retail outlets. When we're talking about common carriers, they obviously, so they're open to the general public. They have a security lien interest for any unpaid transportation or service charges. So think of like COD deliveries. They certainly have the right to compensation as per the agreement. Those are like their core rights. Duties, deliver the goods as agreed. It's fairly simple. So if you or I, deposit something with the post office or UPS or FedEx, and we want it overnighted to some location wherever it is, or if you're a business doing the same thing, it's like just deliver the goods. That really is what the core kind of requirement is as per the agreement. There are, when you think of limits on the liabilities of carriers, the common carrier anyway, the limits do exist. The general standard is that they're liable for any kind of loss or damage, which is at least that initial kind of like thought is very expansive, but we do have a number of exceptions to that general liability. And if you look at all this list, see a loss caused by an act of God or nature, act of public enemy, act of public authority, act of the shipper, those are all exceptions. So usually the thing that all of those things have in common is that they're out of the control of the common carrier. That's the thing to kind of focus in on. But if it's something that's under the control of the carrier, they're going to be held liable then. If there's damage, shrinkage, whatever occurs, destruction of the goods, the carrier is going to be responsible at that point. Carriers can, when they're interacting with especially business customers that are shipping goods, remember we talked about in chapter 20 liquidated damages. So carriers can agree ahead of time with a customer if should something happen, this is going to be the default cost or penalty that, we as the carrier are going to kind of, incur. And again, like with anything, it does need to be reasonable. You can't, waive all liability or responsibility. That would be considered, too far. That would be unconscionable at that point. But again, we want to provide businesses when they're transacting with other businesses a lot of flexibility, so that maybe the goods are fairly durable, and it's like I'm not really worried that you're going to ding or dent something. Maybe they're very well containerized, and it's like, well, okay, I'll waive damage liability as long as you get the goods to their destination in order to save whatever percent on the contract value. So, we give companies that flexibility to enter into those types of agreements. Anyway, this is the end of Chapter 21, so hopefully you have a better appreciation now for understanding the categories of bailments, the level of duty that's required, and how bailments, in terms of some specific examples, how we talk about, warehousers and then carriers. So that was the focus for this chapter. But if you have any questions, as always, please feel free to message me. You can call, email, or text me at any point. I'll be happy to get back with you as soon as I can. But have a good, safe, and productive rest of the week. Bye-bye.